We are nearly at 1.6, so it is time for a tier list. I wanted to do this a bit earlier, but there's a lot of characters to cover since I haven't done one of these before, don't have anything to reference. I'm going to try and do this every patch, and then we'll just update it as new characters come in, as characters change and the meta shifts. So it shouldn't be this long every time, hopefully. There is a popular tier list that's been a bit questionable, Bradwin, so I definitely want to offer my perspective on this. Before we go too much further though, I think it's worth mentioning that at this stage in the game, any character can clear sheer defense or deadly assault if you have a good build, good team synergy, or a high skill level. This tier list is about ranking characters' relative strength rather than about promoting a hard meta. I'm a big advocate for pulling your favorite characters and then building their best teams around them, which is something you can definitely do in the current game state. No character is a must pull, but some are definitely stronger than others. Now that we're a little further into the game and reruns have officially begun, I will be treating all DPS characters as a 2-cost investment in their best teams. 2-cost investment means either with their first cinema or their signature W engine, whichever they prefer. The current endgame only requires 6 fully built characters across 2 teams for full polychromes, with the third team being completely optional. With this in mind, it's really better to build out your first 2 teams and then invest a little further into the characters you really like. Any characters beyond 3 teams are currently not necessary since elemental weakness and resistance are only a 20% difference compared to a neutral matchup. Many W engines and early cinemas are a better investment than pulling a new DPS of a different element, not just because the damage increase can be similar or higher than playing into weakness, but also because you free up more resources to have better invested characters. As for standard characters, many players will be at their 300 guarantee, meaning early cinemas and W engines are both on the table for certain characters. We'll mention them as we go. The standard characters in the A ranks, we're just going to go over them really quickly. So let's start with Anby and Koleda. Both great stunners. The issue is that they don't have much or at any support at all when it comes to filling into teams. We look at characters like Lyda, we look at characters like Lycaon. They're a little bit higher up in the list and they have a lot more value because they're providing damage, not just access to stun. Let's talk about the A rank attackers, and we'll do Ben in a sec. Let's also add Nekomata. The main issue for physical is that one electric, their best force set is Fanged Metal, but we don't really have any good physical supports to help them enable that. Also, Nekomata specifically has scaling in her kit for triggering assault, which again means you either have to run without a stunner and bring Piper instead, or you just have less assaults, which means that her base damage is lower. So just physical, yeah, not in a great state at the moment. Potentially could be brought up by a physical stunner. They have been brought up a little bit by someone like Astra, but everyone has been brought up by Astra, so physical really only has Caesar. So that's, as for Anton, similar situation. Force at Thunder Metal is going to be his best option, which requires shock to be on the enemy 24/7. It's really hard for him to maintain that on his own, so he really needs someone like Grace, and that just reduces your overall support and your damage output. But he, again, like the other characters here, he's usable, just not great. Ben, why would you use Ben over Caesar or Seth? He just doesn't offer enough. That's really all there is to it. Grace and Piper, I'm gonna put here in just with all the new characters. Like, they're both pretty similar in terms of their damage output. They're decent characters. They just, similar to Anby and Koleda, they're good characters. They just, compared to all of our limited characters, they just don't perform quite as well. Damage output is a bit lower, and they're a little bit clunky to play, so that probably doesn't help. Let's do Soukaku. I think Soukaku can go in B. Her buffing is good, and she's decent for Miyabi, but with both Astra and Caesar in the game, as well as Nicole being a better buffer for not every team, but a lot of teams, Soukaku being really only good for ice teams, kind of, she's not in a great spot right now. Again, if you're new, she's a great support for Miyabi or Ellen, but outside of that, and she's not even their best in slot anymore. And that's kind of the issue for Soukaku. She is getting power creep out of the meta a little bit, and I would say the same for someone like Lucy. I'm gonna put her at the, there's no one else in A at the moment, but I'm gonna put her at the bottom of A, just because I think she can play into a few more teams, so her value is a little bit higher, and also her field tabs are butts. It's just Astra, Caesar, Nicole being the top tier for support right now. Rina, I'll also put her in the top. I'm going to put her a little bit higher in A. And the main reason for that is because she is pretty good once you get her C1. Once you get her signature W engine and her C1, she does really start to show signs of life. Before that, she's probably down here and maybe even further down because her pen ratio buff is good. It's just not strong enough unless you get her C1, which adds an extra, like it goes from 30 to 39%, which is pretty good. However, the problem with Rina is that most teams would prefer like Nicole's defense shred as well as her crit rate buffing. They'd prefer Astra or Caesar for the attack buffing. Really, the only place that she shines is with Electric Anomaly because she does have that shock extension. And let's talk about Lycaon. He's a good stunner, but he suffers from the same problem it does. He only plays into ice teams. He can play into other teams, but like who are you gonna play him with? Like Corin? Unless we get like a super meta ice support, I don't see him having value outside of ice teams. Just because of his passives and stuff. He's a good stunner for Ellen and for Miyabi, but both of them have better team options now, so he's kind of fallen a little bit. Soldier 11, our last standard character. Definitely, I'm gonna put her in the top of A. She keeps getting buffs. I'm gonna be honest. Soldier 11, if you were a Soldier 11 main, you had Soldier 11 since the start of the game, maybe you fell in love with her playstyle, I don't know. If you're a Soldier 11 fan though, like she's eating well. She has Lighter, Caesar, Burnice is a bit questionable, Astra's universal support, plus now with Evelyn's release, you can actually run Evelyn's W engine on Soldier 11, which by the way is an insanely good W engine. Genuinely, Soldier 11 has a lot of really strong options if you want to make her strong. With Trigger on the horizon as well, she might get an upgrade there too. You know, being part of the same faction. We're not 100% sure how that's going to go down, but definitely looking good for Soldier 11. I think she's a solid A. Most of our limited DPS will beat her out. Depends on how far you are invested in your Soldier 11. But yeah, Soldier 11's an A for me. Nicole. The only reason why this character isn't in SS is because she does work a little bit better in crit DPS teams just because her 15% crit rate buff is huge. It is also at C6, which not every player is going to have been lucky enough to get at this point. Most players who use her probably have it. It just depends on your pool situation. But her double support duo with Astra is so insanely strong right now. People thought that when Astra was released that Nicole was going to get power crept and thrown in the bin. The opposite has happened. Astra has buffed Nicole and made all of the other supports look worse because she's just a stronger attack buffer. It makes a lot of sense actually. They both provide different things. Nicole has defense shred, a little bit of damage percent, and a crit rate buff. Astra on the other hand has a huge attack buff, a little bit of damage again, but then a crit damage buff, and they just complement each other so well. Astra can trigger corruptions for Nicole. Nicole has huge anomaly uptime. I can see them being a great support duo for an anomaly character too. Someone like Miyabi who does want those disorders. If you can run Nicole on an anomaly build, she's great in a core like that. She's in Jian's best team now. Jian, Nicole, and Astra performs really, really well. You can put her in with Evelyn if you don't have Lighter yet, and it performs better than running with Koleda. Feels like a little bit like a sub DPS at times. So she's definitely the strongest of our standard and A rank characters. By a fair margin, I would be inclined to put her in SS, but let's not go that far yet. I will say that the difference between SS and S is pretty close, and I would say the gap between S and A should be bigger than the gap between S and SS. Alright, we should talk about Seth. I nearly forgot about him. Let's put him in A. I think he's a strong buffer. His problem is that he's a single target buffer. Most anomaly teams are double anomaly. So compared to supports like Lucy or even Caesar, Astra, he just doesn't do enough. However, he's the only anomaly proficiency buffer in the game, so he's pretty much essential in all of Jane's hypercarry teams. You're running Jane, he's a great pickup, definitely good to have. Outside of Jane teams, I think he's a bit questionable. But if you do have skill issue and you need a defender in your anomaly team and you don't have Caesar, he will do okay. Let's go with Ellen next. Ellen is the epitome of how the mighty have fallen. She went from being a top tier DPS at the start of the game to now being pretty similar to Soldier 11 in terms of her damage, and that's despite all of the upgrades she's gotten. You know, she's gotten lighter, Astra, Caesar. These are all characters that have improved her damage, but it also does take away her ice teammates, which makes her 4-set a little bit weird. Previously to this, she's been running 4-set Polar Metal. Now that she doesn't have any ice units, she probably would rather Woodpecker Electro, but that is a bit of a shit set, let's be real. The uptime on it is pretty poor, so it's kind of hard for her to see the same peaks as she used to. Look, if we get a new 4-set sometime in the future that really works with her, yeah, sure, I could see her staying here in A, really outshining someone like Soldier 11, but I would also expect Soldier 11 to move further down as time goes on, so we'll see. I'm not saying she's a bad unit. She's still a good unit. She's still clearing content. She's still able to clear Deadly Assault. She defends, but it's not the way that it used to be. She used to be a solve-all for pretty much any content in the game. Now you really do. You don't have to play her into Ice Week content, but she does struggle outside of it. Even against Ice Week content in Deadly Assault, she struggles to get 30k, which is something that's pretty achievable for most other DPSs. Mind you, this is 30k with her signature weapon, which is of course her early investment of choice. Her C1 does provide a bit more crit rate and does make, I think, her charged attacks a bit easier, but generally she gains more damage from getting her W engine, so you would go for that first. Again, she's a good unit, she's just not great anymore, and that's okay. Okay, Jian. If you've seen my video, you know exactly why Jian is up here in SS. Her clear times compared to Miyabi, I've done like 3 Deadly Assaults now, tried both either sides and also the neutral sides, and she does really, really well. Nicole, Astra, Jian is one of the best teams in the game. I'm not going to call it the best team in the game, but it's definitely on par with Miyabi and her best teams. She obviously needs this team to do really well, and you probably want to pick up her C1 over her W engine. This team will perform a bit better with the Brimstone than Signature, so if you're planning on further investing into Jian, I'd definitely get her C1 and run this team over the Qingyi team. Qingyi team, we'll touch on that a little bit later, but it's just, based on my testing, it took a C2 Qingyi to match Astra, even just at C0. If we're talking about C1 Jian, yeah, Astra kind of blows Qingyi out of the water a little bit, especially in Deadly Assault. In sheer defense or in like boss content, there can be an argument for Qingyi, but the main issue is that Astra just buffs Jian too much, and so like, why would you run Qingyi? This is more talking about Qingyi, so let's change what we were doing, and we're just going to rank Qingyi now because we're talking about her anyway. She goes in ass. I think she is a skill issue player's best friend because she's so easy to play. You just on-field her until the stun hits, and then switch to your DPS and whack until the stun window's over, and you go back to Qingyi. The problem with Qingyi is that her buff isn't big enough to counter the trade-off of losing that much field time. That's all it is. It's not that she's a bad character, it's just her buff isn't quite big enough. Her field time doesn't get shorter until her C1, and then at that point in time, you might as well just finish stunning anyway, because you don't get any value out of her until you stun. So it's just like, stun in general is in a weird place, but she just doesn't give a big enough buff. So okay, her stun damage multiplier works out to be a 53% final damage increase during stun windows, whereas Astra has a 62% final damage increase for my Jian at all times. And this is even with running double attack percent disc on Jian, which is again not an optimal build, by the way. You probably want to run either damage with Astra. Like, even though you get, you know, a couple more stuns with Qingyi than you would with Astra and Nicole, you don't get enough that it makes up for it. Like, especially in Deadly Assault, sometimes you're going to miss out on Jian's ult to certain stuns, and you're going to need to bring her on field a bit more if you want to get her ult every stun. I would rather just use Astra. Again, there is going to be a bit of skill issue with Zhu Yuan if you're struggling to play her. So the TLDR, if you're comfortable with Zhu Yuan on field, I do recommend running her with Astra and Nicole. You're going to get really, really high value out of that team. You're probably going to outperform the Qingyi teams as well. And that's the main reason why I'm putting Zhu Yuan up here in SS. However, if you are struggling with Zhu Yuan on field, you're probably going to find a lot more value in Qingyi. If that is the team you're running, I would probably view Zhu Yuan as an S tier character rather than an SS. Jane belongs in S. I think Jane's main issue is that she doesn't benefit from double anomaly as much as other characters. Also, her anomaly application is quite slow, even with her W engine, which is probably the first vertical investment you'd go for. Her best team at the moment is with Seth and Astra. Astra's chain attacks do give her more gauge, which is really nice. Having that passion stream be extended, and you can do double chain attacks with her as well, so that's really good. But the main issue with Jane though is she hogs field time, and so that does restrict her teammates to some degree. She also doesn't benefit from disorder as much as other characters. So while you can run her in a dual anomaly team with someone like Yanagi, it's not the best. Her teams with Burnice were only slightly better than her team with Seth and Caesar. Plus, she also needs a shield because her spin leaves her vulnerable. You either have to cancel the spin and lose out on DPS, or just bring a shield and tank it, which is so weird considering how many dodges she has and how comfortable she is to play on field. Aside from that, but she's a great early DPS because she is strong out the gate, and you just need like someone like Seth, and then you can use it. You can just use like any free support, like if you have Rina, if you have Lucy, even Nicole works fine. I think she belongs in S, but she is falling off a little bit. We'll see how things go with new teammates, but she's still stronger than Ellen, but not by a lot. Let's talk about Burnice. Burnice, in terms of her vertical investment, her W engine and her C1 are good, but neither of them are like more outstanding than the other. So I'd probably go for a W engine personally, just because I can't be bothered managing her energy properly. Even though you don't need it, and her energy, you can manage her energy, you do have to play. You basically have to use her single flame launcher rather than the double. Double obviously uses more energy. It has more damage and more and faster anomaly build up. So if you're running her with her W engine, she takes up less field time, and then her C1 will increase her off-field application. So they're both good to have. I think ideally you eventually get both if you're running her long term, but I think for now, I mean, it doesn't really matter which one you choose. Her ranking doesn't change. I think she's solid. She's not necessarily best in slot in any teams right now. She's good with Chain, she's good with Yanagi, she's good with Miyabi. But when Miyabi's best in slot is Yanagi, I kind of have to leave her here in S. The difference between Miyabi and Burnice and Miyabi and Yanagi is not that big of a difference, especially if you're playing into Fire Week. It's still worth noting, so I'm going to put her here in S. Yanagi, I'm going to put her here under I'm going to put her above Nicole. The only reason why she's above Nicole is because triggering disorders at will is kind of broken, and we don't know how good that's going to be long term. The fact that she can be played as a main DPS as well as a sub DPS as well is super powerful. Like, if you're going to pick up Yanagi as your first character, she's so powerful to pick up because you can force her in like a mono electric team or in like a Lucy Seth team, and you can get away with it. You'll outgrow that team real quick, but once you do, she has so many options. You can play her with Burnice, you can play her with Miyabi, you could play her with Nicole and Astra and run Nicole as an either sub DPS. Like, I'll touch on that more in a couple of weeks, but she is really quite flexible, really quite strong. Her ability to trigger disorder at will, so strong. The W engine is probably her best vertical investment. Definitely pick that one up if you want to play her long term. Her C1's not too bad, gives her more on-field power and a little bit more AP. It's not essential though. Definitely could be considered up here in SS, but because her on-field playstyle is a little bit weaker than Jian, I'm going to bring her down just a little bit. Miyabi, yeah, that's an SS. We can't really talk about Yanagi without talking about Miyabi. They are both so good together. The only reason why Yanagi has moved down is because her on-field is a little bit weaker. She's also pretty close to Burnice in terms of being Miyabi's anomaly partner. So there is that, but she still makes the strongest dual DPS core in the game, especially if you can pair them with Astra. They are so easy to play in that team. Yeah, Miyabi, the easiest DPS with the highest damage ceiling. In terms of skill ceiling, there's really not much you can do with Miyabi other than switching out of her charge basic, really. I think she can go in SS for now. I think she'll stay here even if she gets power crept a little bit. Just that's because she's so easy and so accessible to play. For Miyabi, you definitely want to pick up her W engine. It makes a big difference in the build. Obviously, anomaly characters don't have any crit scaling in their W engines normally. However, Miyabi is the first crit scaling anomaly character, so running her with crit rate attack W engines can be an option if you don't want to get the W engine. Haramasa, the free character we got that not a lot of people have played. He's just tough to play. Like, he could be up here in SS or down here in A, depending on how good of a player you are. We're gonna go with the middle at S. Yeah, I mean, I should build him at some point, but I've been seeing some crazy stuff with him. He does feel like he's a bit reliant on Qingyi at the moment, which is probably the only reason why I haven't knocked Qingyi down even further. He's great with Qingyi. He is just tough to play. You really need to practice his combos and his burst windows and get them down. But once you can do that, he's really strong. Our last DPS character and our newest character, Evelyn. Yeah, she goes up here in SS with Miyabi and Jian. She's a little bit like Haramasa, where you do need to master her combos, you do need to master her stun window rotations. But once you do, and again, I think she's a lot easier than Haramasa, but you definitely do need that proficiency on Evelyn to get to that Miyabi level, which is definitely possible with her best team. Something else to keep in mind. You won't be able to do this with just Evelyn, Astra, and Nicole. You can get pretty close. When you do have Evelyn's premium team, she will be putting up numbers and clear times very similar to Miyabi, which is actually a really healthy thing for the game, I think. The fact that she's not power creeping Miyabi per se, but the fact that she can, in her best team, put up, something that's reasonably similar. Again, Miyabi can do it on a lot more teams, so don't think that Miyabi is worse off. I think, Evelyn is still a little bit underneath Miyabi. There is one other thing with Evelyn. She does have a bit of room to grow because she doesn't have an ideal foresight right now, but Miyabi also doesn't have her best in slot third teammate yet. It's pretty much just Yanagi at the moment, and then whoever you have available, whether that be Astra, Caesar, Lycaon, some people you running triple anomaly with Burnice. All these options are great, but that team doesn't really have a perfect third character yet, whereas Evelyn's team feels like the first complete team in the game. Evelyn, Lighter, Astra, their synergy, it feels like it was designed from the start. I think that they actually nailed the balance when it comes to Evelyn. She can compete with Miyabi, but she's usually not better than Miyabi because Miyabi still has her strengths that Evelyn doesn't have, being able to play into more teams. And I think that kind of helps define Miyabi as a Void Hunter, which I think is a really good thing. As for Evelyn's first early investment, her W engine is huge for her. You definitely want to get the W engine if you're gonna maining her. Get that W engine. It's so good for her. Playing her with Lighter and Astra just does a lot for her as well. She's got a lot of resistance shredding, not just from Lighter, but also her W engine, which actually makes her really strong against neutral and even fire resistant enemies. Evelyn feels like she has a complete team right there and ready to go. Lighter, Astra, Evelyn feel so synergistic, so strong together. Super fun team to play. Lighter's attacks fit within, well, most of the time they fit within Evelyn's chain attack. So you can switch off her and get most of Lighter's stuff out. And by the time he's done, Evelyn's ready to go again. And you really don't waste any field time. It's such a good team. Okay, so let's talk about supports. Obviously, we already did Qingyi. She's up here in S tier. As for Caesar, I think... So Caesar's interesting. If you are a skill issue or a mobile player, she belongs up here in SS tier. No doubt about it in my mind. However, if you are a mid to high level skill player, she's belongs here in S. Outside of Jane and maybe Ellen, and when I say Jane, I mean Jane's double anomaly teams, then yeah, Caesar's great in those teams. But other than that, she's usually a worse option than either Nicole or Astra. She is a good buffer, but I think she's a bit overrated at the moment. Her stun output isn't actually that great. Even though her shield does scale from impact, so you build quite a bit of that. Her actual days, it's not the worst, but it's not great either. So I think her days potential has definitely been overrated a bit. Plus, most teams don't need a shielder. The only teams that need a shielder are Jane when you want to finish her spin, and sometimes Ellen because her charged attacks do take a long time. As for everyone else, you pretty much don't need Caesar. And even then with Ellen, getting the quick assists from Astra tends to be better now, so it's like Caesar's a good option for Ellen, but she's not the best. Jane also sometimes uses Seth, especially if she wants Astra now, so that kind of leaves Caesar in a weird spot where she's not the best for any team. She's good, but she's not the best. As for Lighter's definitely up here in SS. I'm gonna put him above Jian. I think he's proven his value with Evelyn and how powerful he makes the Evelyn Astra team. Like Evelyn with Astra on her own is already really powerful, but he does kind of elevate that team just to that next level. And he's obviously still good with Ellen, with Soldier 11, with Miyabi even. And now that he has like two teams that one team in particular he's really good in, he definitely deserves SS. Also, with the announcement of Hugo being Ice Attack, there's a good chance that they have some synergy together. We don't know for sure, but there's a good chance, and that does make me want to keep him up here in SS for sure. As for Astra, up here in SS, there's no question about it. Astra is just the best character in the game right now. She takes up very, very little field time, gives you insane amounts of attack, adds a little bit of damage, and a little bit of crit damage. She's got healing with her ult, and also adds 2 extra chain attacks, which is really crazy good for Evelyn, Jian, and Jane, since they all have extra stuff that they get from chain attacks. Obviously, Evelyn's main damage source is her chain attacks, Jian gets extra shot shells, and Jane can refill her gauge with a single chain attack. Especially for Jane, since she doesn't usually get chain attacks from stunning as often, Astra tends to be really good for her. She's also incredibly free-to-play friendly, and really the only vertical investment you'd be going for on her is like maybe her C1. Her C1 gives her extra decibels and some resistance shredding, so that's always nice to have, but you don't need it. You can get by with just her base copy and whatever you have on hand. As I'm looking at this tier list now, I also want to move Nicole up. I'm gonna put her above Lighter. The gap between them is pretty close. I was just thinking about it when I was talking about Caesar. Nicole is best in slot in a few teams still, specifically Harimasa, Jian. She can also be used as a bit of a sub DPS now, not just in Jian's mono either team, but also with the new 4-set that looks like it's intended for Vivian, Faith and Song, but also is going to fix some of Nicole's Anomaly Mastery issues. In the past, you've had to pick between Energy Regen or Anomaly Mastery. Now you can forgo the small attack buff you get from Swing Jazz and instead pick up Faith and Song. That way you get Anomaly Mastery and can still run Energy Regen, which keeps her consistently buffing you while also doing a lot of anomaly application. I expect that to be her best setup with Astra as an anomaly support duo. You could support Yanagi, Miyabi, Jane, maybe. We'll see. And Yanagi, I think I will move her up 1 as well, because she's slightly better than Burnice. And I mean slightly. The gap between them is pretty close, but being able to trigger disorders at will with just your EX special is really powerful for Miyabi, and I think that in itself is enough to bump her to SS, considering Miyabi is as strong as she is. So if you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe. If you had any changes, you think I missed anything, you want to advocate for a character to move to a different tier, let me know in the comments down below. Be as civil as possible, and I will consider it. We'll see how we go for the next one. I'll be trying to do one of these every patch, so we will be covering 1.6 when that comes out. Anyway, I'll see you later.